But in order to live with others successfully, peacefully, and freely, we must be governed by a moral principle by which we can live with others. And that principle is the principle of individual rights. So in the handout I've given you, I've offered for you, I've given a series of quotes that I think will make some of these issues straight. I will note that rights are a moral concept, quoting from Ayn Rand from her article, Man's Rights. Rights are a moral concept, the concept that provides a logical transition from the principles guiding an individual action to the principles guiding his relationship with others. The principle by which we can live peacefully, successfully, and freely with others is the principle of individual rights. A right, in other words, she said, is a moral principle defining and sanctioning our freedom of action in a social context. To take that down very simply, when we live with others, we need to be clear about what our proper sphere of action is. And we need to be sanctioned in our ability to take that action. It is not true that our government allows us some freedom, puts up with some liberty on our part, has to tolerate free speech. If it does, that's an improper government. A proper government defends our rights to take these actions. What rights do is set each of us as an individual free from the predations of other men. Think for a moment, concrete terms. What is a greater threat to your life today? An attack by wild bears or the predations of other men? Who stands more likely to actually shorten your life, to take your efforts, to force you into spending half of your time, expending resources in your own defense? Who's more of a threat to you? Wild animals, the threat of starvation, given that we live in an industrial society, even the need for medical care. What is a greater threat to you, that or the predations of other men? And it is the predations of society, I submit, that are the greatest threat to us today. And the purpose of individual rights was to set each one of us free of those predations so that we can live our lives, exercise our own liberty, pursue our own happiness, and keep and dispose of our own property. This, in the shortest nutshell I can do in 5 minutes, is what individual rights mean. Remember that rights are rights to act, and that there is only one fundamental right, the right to your own life. This means the right to engage, quoting Ayn Rand again, in self-sustaining and self-generated action. The right, quote, to take all the actions required by nature of a rational being for the support, the furtherance, the fulfillment, and enjoyment of his own life. The concept right pertains only to action, specifically to freedom of action, unquote. You have no rights to any things. Now, to claim that you have a right to things, that because I need food to stay alive, or health care to stay alive, and therefore that others must provide those things to me, is a blatant contradiction. This gives me the liberty to oppose the liberty of others. It gives me the liberty to violate the liberty of others, and that is a blatant contradiction. All claims that some product of others can be yours by right involve a violation of the rights of others and are a complete and logical contradiction. And this, in essence, going back to the nature of the human being, is why rights are rights to action. And any claim that you have a right to something, even if you desperately need it for your own life, is a violation of the rights of others. The source of rights, quoting Ayn Rand, is not divine law or congressional law, but the law of identity. Rights are conditions of existence required by a man's nature for his proper survival, unquote. The source of your rights is your identity as an individual human being. No greater lie about rights was ever stated than to say rights are granted by the government, offered by the government, given to us by the government, or given to us by others. If I may take the analogy between God and government further, if the government giveth, the government can taketh away. And the government does not grant us our rights, not a proper government. A proper government defends our rights because they defend individuals. A few words about, a couple of observations about individual rights here. First off, note that there are no group rights. There are no rights for any hyphenated Americans as a group. There are no women's rights. There are no Native Americans versus non-Native Americans rights. Strictly speaking, there are no rights of doctors. There are only individual rights. There are only individual rights. Rights are recognized, not granted by nature of the individual. Consequently, there are, strictly speaking, no new rights ever to be created. There are new applications to be discovered. But no new rights to be created. It is not true, as theorists on both sides of the political spectrum have claimed, that if you want a right, simply pass an amendment or pass a law, and we will have it. In fact, we may apply Gresham's law of economics to rights and say the more people have tried to multiply rights, the more, in fact, our fundamental and real rights have been violated. Because, again, this is a contradiction. Now, notice that in the Declaration of Independence laid down the principle of right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And then it followed after this that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now this, it should be obvious, sets the basic origins and purpose of our government. To secure these rights, not to violate them. That, I think, should be obvious. I want to focus on a different aspect of this. Think about the word secure. How does a proper government secure the rights of its citizens? And there is only one way it can do so, through physical force. Government has a monopoly on the retaliatory use of force over a given geographic area. And if it is a proper government, it uses that force to protect and defend the rights of its citizens. Uses that force, in other words, only in retaliation against those who would violate the rights of others through criminal activity, through force, or through fraud. Now imagine the moral inversion, and imagine the horrific consequences that would result if, by perverting the concept of rights into the rights of things to be provided by others, the government were to turn its force against its own citizens and use that force to redistribute the wealth of those who produce to those who do not. We'd end up with something called the modern welfare state. And you can see at every level then, at every level. The government we are seeing today, the rise of the modern welfare state, the rise of the socialist state, the rise of the administrative state, and this healthcare reform is a perversion of the basic nature of rights, a perversion of the basic purpose of government, and is turning physical force of the state against its own citizens. This is a moral issue, and this is what we must identify, and this is how I submit we should start this debate. This is how we need to oppose this so-called health care reform. Now, let me note a couple of things here more about rights. First off, these rights are based on a deeper moral identification. I'm going to leave most of this to your own book, but I do want to note one part of this here. These rights are egoistic. This is not a social ethic of altruism. This is not a statement of our duties to others. It is a statement and a moral principle defining our right, my right to pursue my own life, exercising my own liberty in the pursuit of my own happiness. And for each one of you, it is the same statement. It is your life, your liberty, the pursuit of your own happiness, keeping your own property. That is the purpose of this. In many ways, the founding political genius of the American founders was to do away with the idea that the purpose of government was to be this greater whole that would suppress the cells, its subjects, and to invert this back into its proper hierarchy and to place the individual at the top. To say that it is the individual by nature who has the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.